everybody. How are you today? It's Gretchen Shepherd with Keeping It Real Story and Art. And thank you for joining me for this premiere on Linnaeus Day. What are you saying? What? Yes, this is May 23rd, and it is Linnaeus Day. And I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but I'm giving it my best shot. There'll be a lot of things in this story that I might not pronounce well because this guy was brilliant and he knew Latin and Greek that I don't. So anyway, I am not with you today in person because I am in the backcountry of Yellowstone on an adventure to look for the bears of Greater Yellowstone and do some photographing of them. Hopefully, learn more about them and how we can continue to protect our beautiful wildlife in Yellowstone and every place else, and get some good photographs that I can bring back and show you. But today, on this May 23rd, happy Linnaeus Day, I have a book about someone that was pretty unique and pretty special. And the book is called Carl, Get Out of the Garden. Carolus Linnaeus and the Naming of Everything. I wonder what that has to do with. It's written by a lady named Anita Sanchez. And if you're familiar with that name, it is not the Dr. Anita Sanchez. It is another Anita Sanchez, and it is illustrated by Catherine Stock. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about both of those people. Let's get over here to the screen share. Thank you. There we go. Say Anita Sanchez. She sings the praises of unloved plants and animals, dandelions, poison ivy, bats, tarantulas. She loves to explore the underappreciated wild places of the world, from glaciers to mud puddles. I have to read this to you because it's just her first summer job. Leading kids on nature walks turned into a lifelong passion for nature. Anita worked for many years as an environmental educator for the state of New York, Department of Environmental Conservation at education centers across the state, and developed classes and curricula. She's now a freelance educator, providing programs for schools, libraries, and museums, as well as botanical gardens and arboreta. Years of fieldwork and teaching outdoor classes have given her firsthand experience in introducing students to the terrors and joys of nature. Wait till it gets dark, A Kid's Guide to Exploring the Night. Rotten and Leaflets 3 all come with real experiences on real nature walks. While writing about the environment, she's traveled to many remote places around the world. She's ridden camels in the Sahara Desert, dived the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, and visited the Kingdom of Tonga in the South Pacific, as well as traveling in England, France, and Italy, visiting temples and watching elephants in Sri Lanka, and hiking Mount Olympus in Greece. She has also ventured into 48 states, with Alaska and North Dakota still to go. One of her ambitions is to visit Cuba, where her family originated. To research Meltdown, a book that she has, she traveled far afield to the that's in Iceland, and I can't say it, and something else, glaciers in Iceland, and the Northern Cascades in Washington. That I'm familiar with, Washington State, to explore glaciers firsthand. She also visited the South Tyrol in Italy to view Otzi the Iceman, a 3,000-year-old man frozen into a glacier. Just to research Hello Puddle, she spent a lot of time gazing out the window at the puddles in her own front yard. So that's pretty cool. So she is the author of this book. Let me just check my sound here. I'm going to up it a little bit. There. And there we go. There we go. Nope. There. And have to check my sound, you guys. There we go. I had something not quite correct there. Yes, somebody had mentioned, thank you very much, in sending me the message, Gail, that you had difficulty hearing one of my recordings last time. So I just think I figured that out and upped the sound a bit. That should be better now. Okay, and so the illustrator of this book is Catherine Stock. Now, she was born in Sweden, the daughter of a diplomat stationed in Stockholm. When she was very young, her family moved to Paris, then South Africa, then New Orleans, and finally San Francisco. Life of a diplomat's child. She attended art school at the University of Cape Town. It was 70s were tough in South Africa, and the universities were about the only venue for any tolerated vocal protest against apartheid. One summer, Catherine volunteered at a hospital in Zululand, building a fence around a reservoir to keep the cattle out, and it was hard work, but she fell in love with Africa. After graduating college, Catherine taught art and history at a teacher's training college in South Africa. Soon she moved to London to get her teaching certificate and taught at the Loughton School of Further Education in the East End. So she was disillusioned by the lack of interest in learning, and she moved to New York, where her parents were living, and gained interest in pursuing her art career. And she spent time in New York and at the Pratt Institute, but moved back to Cape Town and lived there for 3 years, but then felt stifled and went back to New York. She's the illustrator of books for children, including Vinny and Abraham, Emily and Carlo, After the Kill, and Gus and Grandpa series. She's the author and illustrator of Esprit in Paris and Park in New York. So, she's just traveled all around, but it's the fact that she was born in Sweden and that whole connection there I found really interesting, because this book is about someone who was Swedish, and the artwork has a really distinctive kind of Scandinavian approach to it. My mother was Norwegian and my grandfather was born there. My mom's half Norwegian, but she spent a lot of time over there and exposed me to a lot of the artwork and whatnot in the Scandinavian countries. And I saw a lot of it oftentimes in books that came back and forth, children's books and other ways. And this kind of illustration that you're going to see in this book is very, very close to that. It's very indicative of that Scandinavian color palette and style that she has. So I really think that it's a nice job that it went with this book of this person very well. So the name of the book, like I said, is Carl, Get Out of the Garden. And we are getting ready for that. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this one. Carl, Get Out of the Garden. It is one of our kind of an biography of this, not an autobiography. He lived in the 1700s, a biography of him. Very fascinating person, and someone who many people don't know about and might recognize the name a little bit later on when if they have some science background, but someone who really has impacted every person on the planet with his work that he did. Carl, Get Out of the Garden. Carolus Linnaeus and the Naming of Everything. If you do not know the names of things, the knowledge of them is lost too. Quote by Carolus Linnaeus. Carl Linné was in the garden again. He just couldn't stay out of it. Carl, get out of the garden. Carl's mother ordered him to stay inside and study. She dreamed that someday he'd become a fine scholar, a lawyer, or best of all, a minister of the big church in their parish of Stenbroholt in Sweden. But Carl was bored by schoolwork. He was always sneaking out to the garden. Even when Carl was a baby, he loved plants. He was born in the spring of 1707, and when he cried, his parents gave him flowers to calm him. As soon as he learned to walk, Carl toddled outdoors to his father's garden. As he got older, he pestered his father to tell him the name of every single plant. And the bugs. Carl watched them for hours, striped ones, fuzzy ones, bugs with huge eyes and lots of legs. What were their names? Carl, get out of the garden, his mother begged him to get back to his school books, but Carl was too busy watching caterpillars crawl. And this quote says, "The garden inflamed my mind from infancy, onwards with an unquenchable love of plants." You see the crane fly, the green golden June beetle, chafferbug, ground bug, wasp. I love how she wrote them as if it was a child writing. Carl loved the garden, but he hated spending long hours indoors studying Greek and Latin. Annoyed teachers told Carl's parents their son wasn't smart enough to become a minister. Carl's disappointed father considered apprenticing him to a shoemaker. But one teacher appreciated Carl's love of plants and suggested that the boy become a doctor. In those days, plants were medicine, so Carl could still spend lots of time in the garden. Carl pleaded to go to medical school instead of making shoes. Finally, his parents reluctantly agreed. "What you enjoy doing, you will do well," his father told him. Wise father. Carl's parents couldn't afford to give him much money for his studies. He was always hungry, happy to even get one meal a day. He had to patch his worn-out shoes with the tree bark or go barefoot. But he studied hard and soon began using his beloved plants to cure people's ailments. There was just one problem. Which plant was which? Doctors, gardeners, farmers, everybody argued about the names of plants. Dandelions might be called blowball, swine snouts, or yellow daisy, depending on which town you lived in. Some plants had 30 or 40 different names. Doctors used long, complicated Greek or Latin names for plants, but even they couldn't agree. Carl used a pretty pink rose to treat dog bites. But was it the right rose? One doctor called it Rosa sylvestris inodora canonina. Another called it Rosa sylvestra alba cum rubror, folio glabro. Told ya, I was going to get chaos, Carl cried. Barbarian jargon. The greatest part of the names of the species of plants are doubtless wrong, he said. So all of these things are saying. People were confused about animals too. Was a bat a type of bird? Was a whale the same as a fish? Scientists argued bitterly. Carl decided to get things organized. He planned to bring order to the chaos and give everything a clear and simple name. But there were millions of organisms. Elephants, mosses, cabbages, butterflies, zebras, cobras, daffodils. It was an enormous job. Could he do it? Look at that watercolor painting there. Oh. Carl Linné was only a youngster, fresh out of school, but he wasn't afraid of a challenge. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. First, he divided the living world into two kingdoms, the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. Then he broke each kingdom into groups that he called classes. He divided plants into 24 classes based on the structure of their flowers. He gave each plant a name in Latin. Every name only had 2 parts, easy to remember. The rose that healed dog bites became Rosa canina, dog rose. Here's the quote says, "So long as the earth shall survive and each spring shall see it covered with flowers, the Rudbeckia will preserve your glorious name." I wonder what that quote's for. Carl named plant after plant, but he never ran out of ideas for names. He named plants based on how they smelled, or if they were fuzzy, or prickly, or smooth. Often he named plants after people he liked. He called a beautiful golden flower Rudbeckia hirta, after a favorite teacher, Olaf Rudbeck. Carl named the plants in his garden. He named plants in the woods and fields. He traveled thousands of miles into Lapland, far in the north of Sweden, to find more plants. Lapland was a chilly, roadless wilderness. Sometimes Carl waded up to his armpits in icy water. Swarms of midges filled my mouth, nose and eyes, he wrote. Often he had nothing to eat but fish and reindeer's milk. Carl braved the cold to collect plants. Crawling on hands and knees, he searched for tiny mosses. Climbing high into trees, he gathered pine cones. He discovered plants no scientists had ever seen before. Carl's favorite was a pink wildflower with twin blossoms and shiny evergreen leaves. The smell of the flowers was like as sweet as candy. And later the little plant was named after him, Linnea borealis, or Linnea of the North. Carl wasn't afraid to take on the animal kingdom. Ostriches, camels, jellyfish, ladybugs, toads, earthworms, sharks, all the living things that flew or swam or ran or crawled. Carl wanted to choose scientific names for them all. But animals came in so many different shapes and sizes. How could he do it? And where should he start? The first stop in wisdom is to know the things themselves. Truth ought to be confirmed by observation, Carl said. So he went into his laboratory and looked at how animals were put together on the inside. Carl peered into the mouths of bats and saw that they had teeth, not beaks. He touched the skin of bats and learned that they have fur, not feathers. Other scientists thought bats were birds, but Carl said no. Carl disagreed with scientists who claimed that whales were fish. He decided whales were mammals because they bear live young and breathe air with lungs, not gills. Whales in the same group with mice? It seemed crazy, but Carl knew they were similar on the inside. Carl divided the animal kingdom into classes. Class Quadrupedea, mammals. Class Aves, birds. Class Pisces, fish. Class Amphibia, amphibians and reptiles. Class Insecta, insects. Class Vermes, worms and other miscellaneous invertebrates. Then he added another group. Class Paradoxa was for animals that were rumored to exist, like unicorns or dragons. Carl realized that they might not be real, but just in case they were, he made room for them. Just as he had done with plants, Carl gave each animal two names. He named honeybees Apis, bee, mellifera, honey-bearing. He named dogs Canis, dog, familiaris, familiar. And Carl knew that people were animals too, and he called humans homo, human, sapiens, wise. Was Carl finished? Not yet. Ever since he was a toddler, Carl had loved insects, but he had a huge job when it came to organizing Class Insecta. Ants, moths, aphids, cricket, wasps, and beetles, beetles, beetles. Could he do it? Carl studied tens of thousands of insects to find out what made them alike and what made them different. He divided the insect class into groups called orders. He put all the insects with wings covered with bright, colorful scales in the order Lepidoptera, butterflies and moths. Insects with hard forewings he put in Coleoptera, beetles. He looked at ants, bees, and wasps, at their narrow waists and sharp stingers, and he put them all together, order Hymeroptera. Carl split each order into families. He then split each family into smaller groups. Each group was called a genus, and each genus was made up of species. Wow. Think about that, how he figured, Carl eagerly wrote books about his new ideas. But when other scientists read them, they got angry. Famous botanists and zoologists had spent their lives inventing names like, oh my goodness, Hypothlacocarpidarium dorium and Monolassicalcalimenum forliphyllorium. I have no idea if I got that close. They were furious when this young upstart threw out their work. And almost everyone agreed that Carl had made an enormous blunder. He had named humans as if they were just another animal. Even worse, he had lumped them in with mammals like groundhogs and gorillas and cats and chimpanzees. A botanist named Johann Sigersbeck called Carl's work loathsome. The Pope banned Carl's books and ordered that they be burned. Carl lost his temper. Idiot and fool, he called Sigersbeck. The two men fought bitterly, trading insults by mail. But Carl had the last word. He named a fuzzy, bad-smelling weed Sigsbeckia orientalis. The quote says, he considers himself a second Adam and gives names to all the animals without ever caring for his predecessors. Albrecht von Haller. That was somebody who didn't like what he said. Finally, Carl realized that arguing would do no good. Time is too valuable to be spent in disputes, he wrote, and he just went on naming things. Carl became a teacher. Perhaps he remembered how bored he'd been in the classroom because he used his garden as a living textbook filled with thousands of plants. He led exciting, rowdy field trips into the woods and meadows, expeditions with hundreds of students, lasting from morning till night. Carl had his students marched along, carrying banners and playing musical instruments. Whenever someone found an unusual plant, Carl would hurry over and get down on his hands and knees to examine it. If the plant was a rare specimen, he would call for the bugles to sound. Omnia miraria otium triticemia. Find wonder in everything, even the most ordinary. Sorry. I love that saying. Find wonder in everything, even the most ordinary. As Carl's students grew up, many of them traveled to far-off places to study nature. Arabia, India, Russia, China, Australia, Africa, Japan. They voyaged around the globe, and everywhere they went, they taught people about Carl's ideas. They wrote to their beloved teacher about all the new plants and creatures they saw, and Carl realized he wasn't even close to being done with his big job. His students sent him specimens from tropical islands, Arctic mountaintops, deserts. On tables and shelves in his study were spread dozens, hundreds, thousands of specimens. Mulberries from Canada, silkworms from China, seashells from India, water lilies from Egypt. He had live animals too, a raccoon from North America and a parrot from South America. Could he name them all? Yes. Carl classified and named more than 12,000 species of plants and animals. Now scientists around the world, whether they spoke English or Swedish, Russian or Chinese, could communicate with one another using the same unique name for a living thing. Carl had done it. He had created a new language of science and changed the way people saw the world. Daucus carota, Daucus carota, Daucus carota, so among different scientists around the world. Doctors, farmers, gardeners, everyone began to use Carl's clear and simple system. His fame spread. Awards and medals were showered on him. Kings and queens eagerly read his books. In 1757, Carl Linné was knighted by the King of Sweden, King Adolf Frederick, dubbed him a Knight of the Order of the Polar Star, the first scientist to be given that great honor. And Carl gave himself a more important sounding name, Latin name, Carolus Linnaeus. He also designed a coat of arms as a symbol of his nobility. Most people picked fearsome beasts like lions or dragons to decorate their coats of arms, but Carl chose Linnea borealis, this little sweet-smelling twin flower from Lapland. Even after he became rich and famous man, Carl went on working in the garden. He planted thousands of species from all over the world: banana trees, wild tulips, water lilies, cacao bushes, laurel trees, and his beloved twin flowers. Plants for medicine, plants for food, plants for learning, plants for joy. Monkeys, parrots, peacocks shared the garden, too. Among his plants and animals, Carl said, "I live happier than a king." Carl never did get out of the garden. He says, the quote says, "Formerly I had plants but no money, and now of what use is my money without plants?" Linnaeus was not big, not small, thin, brown-eyed, light, hasty, walked quickly, did everything promptly, could not stand lateness, was quickly moved, sensitive, worked continuously, could not par himself. That's a description he wrote of himself. Even after some information about Carl Linnaeus. Even after achieving fame and success, Carl couldn't stop working. He went on teaching and studying nature throughout his long life. He was eager to kindle a spark in the minds of young naturalists, and he would often teach for free, and he went on creating gardens. If a tree dies, he said, plant another in its place. At the end of his life, Carl found it hard to hobble downstairs to tend his beloved plants, so he made a garden in his bedroom. He cut illustrations of plants from botanical books and covered the walls with big hand-colored pictures of flowers. When Carl died, all Sweden mourned him. During his torchlit funeral processions, huge crowds lined the streets to bid farewell to the great naturalist. To this day, nature lovers around the world observe May 23rd, Carl's birthday, as Linnaeus Day. Scientists discover new plants and animals every year. They use Carl's ideas as they think up new names. And as Carl knew, there are millions of species still waiting to be discovered. Carl's big job will never be finished. He says, here's a note about names. It's funny that someone who became famous for precise naming has so many names of his own. Carl's father chose the surname Linné after an ancient linden tree that stood on the family land. So Carl started life as Carl Linné. After he was knighted, Carl used the name von Linné to show his new noble rank. Just as he used Latin names for plants and animals, he often used the Latin version of his own name, and Carl became known to history as Carolus Linnaeus. Scientific classification. Carl developed his system of classification over many years. He experimented with several different naming systems before settling on binomial, two-word nomenclature naming. Scientists still use the basics of Linnaeus' system today. For example, the furry, barking, howling animal we call coyote would be classified like this: kingdom, Animalia, animal; phylum, Chordata, chordate, has a backbone; class, Mammalia, mammal; order, Carnivora, carnivore; family, Canidae, dogs; genus, Canis; species, latrans, barking. The scientific name of the coyote is Canis latrans. Scientific names are always written in italics or underlined. The genus is always capitalized, but the second name, called the specific epithet, is not. If an L appears after the name, that means it was originally named by Linnaeus himself. It says, to remember the degrees of classification, try this memory trick. So, kangaroos play cellos, orangutan spittle, gorillas sing. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I could have probably used that in my botany classes in college. Ugh. So science is always evolving. Over time, scientists have made many changes to the Linnaean system. For example, there are now additional kingdoms for fungi and bacteria. Kingdoms are divided into groups called phyla. The class for mammals is now called Mammalia instead of Quadrupedea, and there are many more classes of plants and animals than Carl used. He lumped reptiles with amphibians, but now they are in separate groups. Scientists have gone on arguing about what should be grouped where. Like Carl, they study the structure of an organism, whether it's flower, a fish, a bird, or an amoeba, to see how it's organized on the inside. Carl used a magnifying glass. Today, scientists use electron microscopes and computers to analyze DNA. They have discovered that some things that look alike aren't necessarily related to each other. The science of classification will change even more with time. Carl collected and identified tens of thousands of plants and animals. His enormous collection is now owned by the Linnaean Society in London, and Carl's garden is still flourishing outside his home in Hammarby, Sweden, where faded flower pictures still decorate the walls of his bedroom. Wow. Finding wonder. Doesn't this sound familiar? Carl always saw beauty and excitement in the natural world. Even as an old man, he would bounce out of bed and run into the garden in his nightshirt and nightcap to see a new plant or bird. Nature does not wait for powder and wigs, he would tell his young students, who had to move fast to keep up with him. Carl found wonder in everything in nature: a majestic whale, a glittering beetle, or a tiny pink wildflower. Look around. What do you wonder at? Wow. Has a whole timeline of his life there. He was born in 1707. In 1727, he went to Lund University to study medicine. 22, he started works classifying plants and animals and minerals. In 1732, he traveled thousands of miles to spend months collecting plants while living with the Sami, the indigenous people of Lapland. He published the first edition of the Semetica Natura, Nature's Systems, in 1735. He got married in 1739. They had 7 children. 1753, he published Species Planetarium, Species of Plants, a listing of thousands of plants and species and their classification. This book is considered to be the basis of modern scientific classification. In 1757, he was knighted. In 1778, he died and is buried in Uppsala Cathedral in Sweden, which my mother has been to. And 1788, Carl's collections and papers form the basis of the Linnaean Society in London, an organization dedicated to the study of natural history. Wow, you guys. That, I don't know about you, but I find that kind of stuff fascinating. It's just one of those things. I just love it. Plus the illustrations, the beautiful, beautiful watercolor, and the line, the ink lining, and just the whole color palette is so well done. That was a longer book. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading that. And, you know, it's fitting on May 23rd, on this day that celebrates naturalists and the outdoors and the plants and animals, that's where I am. I'm in the world's very first national park, Yellowstone, a place that is, so full of wonder, and it's there for all to see, and someplace that needs to be treasured and protected. And I'm going to have a great time while I was here, and I'll bring pictures back. But until then, thank you for joining me for this story today on Carl, Get Out of the Garden. And you know what? Don't listen to that. Go get into the garden. Go look for the beauty hidden in plain sight. Go look for the wonder of it all. And I will see you next time. All right? So take care, everybody. I'll be back in a few days. But until then, keep watching the premieres. I'll get on if I can. But chances are I'm pretty off grid. But thank you for listening for this special story tonight. And you are all a wonder.
In the heat of the night, we could get lost in all the lights and sounds. Feeling alright, we won't go home, we will just stay here downtown. There's not just stars on the boulevard, they're in the light in your eyes. Oh, we don't need no black cards, I just need you by my side. We could be shameless.